The time for silence is over.
The decision the Senate announced weeks ago remains about a principle and not a person. About a principle and not a person. The American people should have a say in the court's direction. The American people should have a say in the court's direction. Our view is this: the American people should have a say in the court's direction. So that the American people have a voice. So that the American people have a voice. Mr. President, the next justice could fundamentally alter the direction of the Supreme Court and have a profound impact on our country. Give the people a voice. So, of course, the American people should have a say in the court's direction. Our view is this: give the people a voice. The American people are perfectly capable of having their say on this issue. So let's give them a voice. Let's let the American people decide.
Join me every Sunday afternoon. Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Chris. I'll be your host for today. It is Sunday, November the 29th. We're almost a month after the election after this point. And while Trump's conspiracy theories are still going on, he seems to be backing away from it just a little. Like I said last week, I'm pretty much done covering that until they come with some form of actual evidence that's greater than this person said they saw something. So unless we get some calls or some messages in chat that bring any actual real evidence, I don't have a whole lot left to say on the subject. Apparently, neither does Donald Trump. So while it's amusing and also dangerous to play with election results this way, to claim fraud when you have no evidence or proof of nationwide multi-state systemic fraud, I would much rather start dealing with issues that are going to matter in the grand scheme of things and get on to moving this country in the direction that it needs to move. The intro pretty much states my position. At this point, I'm in favor of expanding the court. There's a number of reasons for that. First off, historically and constitutionally, the size of the court, the Supreme Court, is not set. It is not set in stone. It was established by Congress back in the late 18th century, so 1700 and something, 1779, I believe it was. Don't hold me to it. It's changed throughout the course of our history. Normally, it has stayed even with the number of circuit courts of appeals that we have, which is currently 12. We decided to freeze the Supreme Court at 9 just because that seemed like a good number to us. There's nothing set in stone that says that it has to stay at 9. Also, historically, Supreme Court justices, at least one of them, is replaced every 2 years. So if, as Senate Majority Leader and prominent Republican Mitch McConnell says, the people deserve a voice in the direction of the court, Republicans have had exactly one time in all of the last 20 years of presidential elections where they have won the popular vote. You know, the voice of the people. More people have voted for a Democratic candidate in every other presidential election except for Bush's second time, his second election, when he was reelected. He won the popular vote that time. He lost it to Gore. Trump lost it to Clinton. Obama won his popular vote both times. For the Supreme Court to be majority Republican right now, that does not reflect the people having a voice in the direction of the court. Maybe the Electoral College having a voice in the direction of the court. Maybe the Republican Party, which represents a minority of Americans in this country, having a voice in the direction of the court. But it does not represent the majority of the people in this country having a voice in the direction of the court. Now, if you had wanted to maintain a balance of 4-4 liberal conservative with a swing head justice, I can at least see an argument for that. But a 6-3 conservative majority, when you've had a national voice of the people once in the last 20 years of elections, one time. And then the next argument is, oh, well, the court shouldn't be political. Okay, well, if the court shouldn't be political, then why did Mitch McConnell block Obama's appointment a year before President Trump was reelected? Because the people deserved a voice in the direction of the court, which that statement right there tells you it's a political statement and a political stance, and then rush through in a few weeks, Amy Barrett's appointment under Trump, because they knew they were going to lose this election. Why the difference? I've covered it briefly before on this show, but the Republican Party stance, especially when it comes to Supreme Court justices, basically only seems to be win. Nothing else matters. If the tradition of the Supreme Court mattered, then Obama's nomination, Merrick Garland, would have gotten a hearing. But that's not what happened. The Republicans made the argument then, McConnell and Lindsey Graham, that since the appointment was due in an election year, that the people should have a voice in that appointment, aka politics should matter. And that as a result of that, they were not going to hold a hearing on Obama's selection, Obama's nomination for the Supreme Court for over a year. Now, if that's your position and that's your argument, I can at least understand it. I might disagree with it because that's not the way we had done business all the way before this. Prior to Merrick Garland's nomination, if a Supreme Court justice died, whoever was in office nominated somebody, that person went to the Senate for the hearings and the confirmation, and boom, you continued on down the path. But that's not the argument that the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, went with. The Republican majority leader. Okay, so you've taken a new position. In an election year, we're not going to hear anything about Supreme Court nominations because the people deserve a voice. Obviously, when Justice Ginsburg passed, this year, well after February, that rule no longer applied. So the court's already been stacked because you stole a seat. You changed the rules that you wanted to play by to steal a seat. It's that simple. And if the court's supposed to be apolitical, why were you playing political games? And then, if you're going to play political games, why are you trying to tell me not to? If it's 10 yards to a first down, it's 10 yards for both teams. It doesn't become 15 yards for my team and 8 yards for your team when it benefits you. You don't get to make this stuff up as you go along, and you don't get to tell me I have to hold myself to a higher standard so you can keep cutting my legs out from underneath me. And we've already seen the results of this. Just this past week, the Supreme Court heard a case from New York where New York was restricting church congregations because of COVID. They've already removed those restrictions, but at the time, I forget which church had sued, and it had gotten its way finally to the Supreme Court, saying that it was a violation of the First Amendment of their right to exercise their religion, and that their rights couldn't be restricted, in this case, even because of a global pandemic. And the court divided strictly among conservative and liberal lines. Now, I can see the argument for both of those on that one, and obviously I'm not a Supreme Court justice, and I highly doubt anybody watching this show is. But it was divided strictly among conservative and liberal lines, which means by definition, the court is political. That's my point to this. Whether or not you want to argue the merits of the case is a whole different ballgame. But it was a political decision based off of the justices' political and religious beliefs. Now, like I said, if you wanted to hold me to tradition, there's been 9 justices on the Supreme Court for quite a long time. We should all just play by the same rules. My side wasn't the side that violated that tradition first. If that was the case, Merrick Garland should be sitting on the Supreme Court right now. That's not what happened. If the only rule is to just win, then that's the set of rules we're going to play by. And there's nothing in the Constitution, nothing whatsoever, that says that the size of the Supreme Court can't change. So I'm arguing that we should change it. And I'm in good company. This has been done before multiple times. This is not some new idea. Back at the beginning of our republic, John Adams tried to shrink the court and cap it in law at 6 so that Thomas Jefferson couldn't appoint the Supreme Court justices that he would want to appoint. The minute Jefferson took office, with the help of his Congress, they passed a law, repealed the law, limiting it to 6, upped it back to 7, and he appointed his justices to accomplish his political aims. Abraham Lincoln after the Dred Scott decision, saying that black people could not be citizens in this country, appointed a 10th Supreme Court justice. To try and effect political change. FDR with the New Deal. The Supreme Court struck down several pieces of legislation that his Congress had passed. And he threatened to pack the court. I believe he was looking at 15, but don't hold me to it. The only reason it didn't get packed was because several of the justices, including the Chief Justice, if I recall correctly, decided to resign and retire instead of standing in the way of what needed to be done to get this country's economy pulled back out of the Great Depression. Why is it that the great liberals in this country, such as Lincoln, such as FDR, constantly have to fight the Supreme Court to enact new legislation that needs to be done to help the majority of this country? And why is it constantly that the end result is always the same? You have to start arguing for expansion of the court because it gets behind the times and it ends up too far behind to keep up with what's actually going on in the current modern world, whether that modern world is today's world or whether that modern world is in the 1930s of America when the economy crashed. And it's always the same argument that ends up resolving it. We're going to expand the court. Now, like I said, however you want to look at this, in the last 20 years, sorry, we had a question from chat. When you said that Republicans have only won the popular vote once, did you mean in the 21st century or in general? Within the last 20 years, Blake, it was Bush's second election term. Historically, Supreme Court justices have served or have been replaced about every 2 years. Basically, once every 2 years, you have a new Supreme Court justice that one retires or passes away, and president will appoint another one. And I'm looking at the full course of Supreme Court justice history, obviously. As a result of that, typically a president would appoint 2 new justices during the course of any given 4-year term. According to Mitch McConnell, the people are supposed to have a voice in this, even though that was a new position to take at the time that he took it, because that was from his interview regarding why he was not going to listen to Merrick Garland's nomination. He wasn't even going to give him a hearing when President Obama nominated him. So if the people are supposed to have a voice, I would assume that's the majority of the people. And we are living in a democracy or a constitutional republic, however you want to slice it. No problem, Blake. Glad I could clear that up for you. But basically, if you go with Mitch McConnell's opinion that the people's voice should be heard regarding the direction of the court, and that's almost a direct word-for-word quote as we just heard, and you go with the historical average of every 2 years a justice gets replaced, then you should have about a 7-2 liberal to conservative Supreme Court. That's the direction that it should be mathematically. Obviously, that's not what we're seeing because the system's been gamed, and you've got a couple of older appointees on there because people are just living longer. But when you look at, like I said, the current makeup of the court, it does not reflect remotely the national vote totals of the people of the country. It's behind. That is an argument in and of itself for expansion. It also goes in line with what Mitch McConnell was saying, the Republican, about the people should have a voice in the direction of the court. And then, of course, the second big argument is that historically the court has been tied, the number of justices in the Supreme Court has been tied to the number of circuit courts of appeals that we have in this country. So originally, when it was founded, you had 3 circuit courts of appeals. You would have 2 Supreme Court justices per, because they would spend half the year traveling to those circuit courts, and they would sit with one of those judges. And then you'd have 3 judges there, 2 Supreme Courts, and one that was tied to that Circuit Court of Appeals that would hear cases. And then they would come back to the Supreme Court to fulfill their duties as a Supreme Court justice. If that was the case now, we've got 12 Circuit Courts of Appeal. So you'd be looking at, 24 plus a Chief Justice for 25. So, like I said, we've decided to artificially cap this. There is nothing in the Constitution that says that it has to be at 9 and it has to stay at 9 and that's the way that it's supposed to be because that's the way the founders intended. That's not the case. Anybody who's telling you that is feeding you a bunch of BS. You may have some opinions off to the side that the founders wrote, but that's not what was enshrined into the Constitution. But that's my basic argument. If we're going to tie the court to the will of the people and we're going to play political games with it, as the Republicans have already done in the last 5 years, in order to steal seats, then let's just create new seats and balance the thing the way that it's supposed to be. If it's supposed to be apolitical, obviously it is not right now. Obviously, this is not the case. Like I said, we are seeing more and more close decisions decided along party lines, and that's not remotely what was intended. If the intent, as Republicans argued 5 years ago, was to tie the court's direction to the will of the people, then let's do that. Me, as a general rule of thumb, in favor of anything that's more democratic, in favor of anything that's more transparent. And that's not what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with backroom games. We're dealing with changing the rules so that it can benefit me or my party at this given point in time. And if one side continues to play by the agreed upon rules and the other side just keeps bending or breaking the rules wherever they can to benefit themselves, it puts the side that's playing by the rules at a severe disadvantage. And you can see this in any sports game or sports analogy that you want to use. If I go to a game of football and it's 10 yards to a first down, but my opponent keeps getting 5-yard first downs, well, he's got a severe advantage when he's playing against me. If the rule is going to be that it's 9 justices, and when somebody passes or retires, then whoever's in office gets to nominate and replace that person, then that's the rule. But that's not what we're doing. We need to either codify this stuff into law, so that way it's not unspoken handshake agreements that can just be broken, like what happened last time, or we need to accept the fact that we're just going to play by whatever set of rules benefits whatever party's in power. Personally, I'm in favor of rebalancing the court the way that it should have been. I don't think we should have a 7-2 majority. I think McConnell's argument is weak personally, because I wouldn't want politics in the Supreme Court. But if you wanted to add justices to, say, get us to 11 and add 2 liberal justices to balance it back out so that you'd have the Supreme Court justice, or the Chief Justice, Justice Roberts, who's relatively moderate, more conservative than I like, but I imagine more liberal than a lot of conservatives like, being the deciding vote a lot of times. And then you wanted to lock it into law that, hey, if somebody dies that's on the Supreme Court, or if somebody chooses to retire, whoever is in office is going to nominate at that point, and they have to have a hearing, then that would be perfectly fine with me. I'm not interested personally in getting points back even if we win the Senate with the 2 Georgia elections that are coming up. I'm not interested in sticking it back to Republicans like they stuck it to Obama. I tend to have a bit more class than that, and I tend to have more faith in the American system and a sense of fair play, and that we're all supposed to work together to achieve the best outcome. So I would rather see it balanced again instead of it being rigged like it currently is with stolen seats. I want to see it balanced, and then I want to see that codified into law that nobody can play these games anymore. Because obviously the handshake agreements and the, this is the way we've always done it, so this is the way we're going to continue doing it, unspoken agreements, those didn't stand up. When push came to shove, we saw what happened. We can't get a hearing for Obama's nomination in a year, but we can get Trump's nomination heard in a couple of weeks, even during the middle of a global pandemic when we can't get any hearings in the Senate about COVID relief. Let's just call it what it is. And the blatant hypocrisy between those two positions, spoken, mind you, by the same politicians. You've got McConnell up there 5 years ago saying one thing and then saying something completely different. You've got Lindsey Graham up there 5 years ago saying one thing and then coming up a couple of weeks ago saying something completely different. Just not something I'm interested in dealing with. Like I said, I would rather codify the rules and take it completely out. Okay, so from the chat, so why not take it out of the government's hand and make it a popular vote for each circuit court with term limits? Would increase the number of seats and also remove the majority of the political games. I tend not to prefer elected judges just because let's face it, the majority of the American population is not legal experts or anything close to. I would prefer a more balanced, some conservative, some liberal judges with some moderates in the middle, and let the best liberals make their best arguments to their judges and make the best conservatives make their best arguments to the moderates, and see which way the legal expertise falls. So I'm not generally in favor of electing judges. I would be okay with some kind of term limits on it. I'm not sold on that it needs to be a lifetime appointment thing. I think we end up with some people on the court that are a little bit past their prime. I could see a 10, 20 year, 10, 15 year nomination process, or a term limit where, once you get to the Supreme Court, you can serve for 10 or 15 years and then thank you, your time is up. We appreciate your service. Go about the rest of your career. And that would ensure a steady cycling of judges, but not so quickly that they weren't still a check on just massive populism in the country. Because that's what the law is not supposed to just change overnight from the founder's point of view. That's the reason everything is staggered in terms of the way our government is set up. That's why the House of Representatives runs every 2 years. That's why the Senate runs every 6 years. That's why you can't elect the whole Senate every 6 years. They're staggered every 2. That's why the president runs on a 4-year term. And then that's why the justices were ultimately a lifetime appointment. I think a lifetime is a bit excessive now, given how long lifespans have expanded since when the founders wrote the Constitution back in the late 1700s. But I can understand wanting a longer period of time for them to serve. But I'm not completely sold that. I don't think your average American could go read legal decisions or has the time right now, when everybody's working 40 and 60 hours a week to make a living, to go read all of these legal decisions of multiple different judges to determine whether they're good attorneys, prosecutors, defenders, judges, whether they make good legal decisions or not. I think it would actually end up making it more political, not less. But yeah, I mean, at this point, I do think that it needs to be rebalanced. I think it's been gamed. I think that's obvious. If you put Mitch McConnell and Mitch McConnell side by side a few years apart, he says one thing out of one side of his mouth, and then he says something else out of another side of his mouth when it benefits him. And since he was the one that ultimately decides who even gets a nomination hearing for the Supreme Court, I think it's pretty obvious that we were just playing political games to balance it.
So here's our view. Instead of spending more time debating an issue where we can't agree, let's keep working to address the issues where we can. We just passed critical bipartisan legislation to help address the heroin and prescription opioid crisis in our country. Let's build on that success. Let's keep working together to get our economy moving again and make our country safer, rather than endlessly debating an issue where we don't agree. As we continue working on issues like these, the American people are perfectly capable of having their say on this issue. So let's give them a voice. Let's let the American people decide. The Senate will appropriately revisit the matter when it considers the qualifications of the nominee the next president nominates, whoever that might be.
That was Senator McConnell on the Senate floor, basically a year before Donald Trump's election in 2016, saying that since Justice Scalia had passed in an election year, there would be no hearing. Now, after Justice Ginsburg passed, a few months before an election, tones changed.
If you're asking me a hypothetical about whether this Republican Senate would confirm a member of the Supreme Court to a vacancy that created this year.
Before November.
Yeah, we would fill it.
Well, if a vacancy did occur, and I don't expect one to, I hope everybody has a long, healthy 2020 on the court, you would see an effort by Republicans, I'm sure, to fill the vacancy.
If President Trump is defeated, if Republicans lose control of the Senate, would you still support doing this prior to January?
I would support going ahead with any hearings that we might have, and if it comes to an appointment prior to the end of the year, I would be supportive of that. We would need to have some very serious discussion about that. But again, it is, even though it's a lame duck session, it is still a Republican president and still a Republican Senate.
We are one vote away from losing our fundamental constitutional liberties. And I believe that the president should next week nominate a successor to the court. And I think it is critical that the Senate takes up and confirms that successor before Election Day.
Like I said, the consistency is key. And clearly, there was no consistency. It's just steal a seat where we can steal a seat. If you wanted to go by the traditional rules that when somebody passes on the Supreme Court, that whoever's sitting in office gets to nominate somebody, then Merrick Garland should be on the Supreme Court, or should have at least gotten a hearing, and then you could have pointed out why he wasn't qualified. But that's not what we did. Instead, we said, hey, there should be no hearings in an election year. But then when this seat came up, totally different story. That's not what we're buying into anymore. Now, obviously, I'm not psychic, but it seems very, very, very clear to me that the only rule is to just win. Just do what benefits my party. And that is putting party over country. And that's not what we're about here. So like I said, expand the court, rebalance it back out, make it fair, codify it into law, make it so that nobody can play this little game again. Thank you, and we'll be back after a short break. Welcome back, everybody. Apologize for the break there. Needed more coffee as normal. I seem to just go through it faster than most people. So the only thing I'm going to say about the Supreme Court case that was just decided against the state of New York, because like I said, I'm not an attorney and I'm not a Supreme Court justice and I'm not a judge and I'm not pretending to be, is that I can completely understand why you would want to restrict all gatherings of large people, including religious gatherings, right now during the course of a pandemic. A pandemic that we do not remotely have under control. A pandemic that is still spreading across the country. And a pandemic that is killing more Americans than we have lost in combat in Korea, in Vietnam, in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and Operation Iraqi Freedom, and our operations in Afghanistan combined. We're currently at 265,000 deaths per the CDC. We're entering cold and flu season. When diseases like this spread better for them and worse for us. My own family is now affected by this. My uncle with multiple pre-existing conditions who has maintained a very strict quarantine on himself, his wife, are both diagnosed now. They got it from their son, we believe, my nephew, who got it from school. He's a teacher. Teaching in classes is a large group of people. Holding religious services is a large group of people. That's the reason many states, not the state they're in, obviously, have gone to trying to do this remotely to limit interaction between people. And I get it. It sucks. We're social creatures. We enjoy the company of each other. I get that going to a religious service via computer and a camera doesn't feel the same. I get that going to class, as my girlfriend does for university, isn't as easy as going and sitting in a physical classroom when it comes to learning material. But people are dying. 265,000 of them. American citizens, just like you and me. You're talking about a preference. You're talking about being uncomfortable and comparing it to somebody's life. These two things are not the same. No one has been telling you that you can't break out your Bible or break out your Quran or break out your Torah and pray. No one has been telling you that you can't break out your college textbooks and study. No one has been telling anybody that they can't wear a cross when they go to the grocery store to buy food or pencils or religious iconography, pictures and statues. What they have been saying is, for the love of God, limit large gatherings. Keep your distance from each other, because you can have this disease and not realize you have it for 10 to 14 days. No one singled out churches specifically. It was all large gatherings. No one is telling you or anybody else they can't practice their religion any more than they used to. We have always in this country recognized that an individual has the right to practice their religion up to the point where it impacts somebody else. And call me crazy, but during the middle of a global pandemic, congregating in large groups of people, when it only takes one to be carrying an infectious disease, and then letting all those people who congregate together go back out amongst the general public, might just impact somebody else. This isn't some new issue. It's always been a balancing act in this country. You've always had the right to exercise your religion up until the point where it influences somebody else, where it impacts somebody else. Just like you have the right to swing your fist around in the air as much as you want up until it starts touching my face. If somebody has a religion that says that they have to commit human sacrifices, they don't get to do it because it impacts somebody else. And at the most basic level, surely you should love your neighbor enough to be able to be uncomfortable for a little while with not being able to go to church and instead having to pray at your house or attend service on a laptop or a computer. It could make the difference between one of your neighbors living or dying. And we already know that this disease targets the most vulnerable members of our population. The elderly and those who are already sick and have pre-existing conditions that make them more susceptible to diseases. You're not being asked to give up your Sundays and go work in COVID-19 wards. You're not being told you can't wear your crosses or make the sign of the cross in public. You're not being told you can't grow out your beard if that's part of your religion, or pray in public. You're not being told that your church has to remove all of its religious iconography and now belongs to the state. You're being told, and you're being asked, and you're being encouraged to follow steps to keep your fellow Americans safe. There's not a single one of us that enjoys wearing a mask. Well, there might be, but I haven't met them yet. And I don't care where you go in this country, everybody complains about it. And just in the last few months, I've been to Georgia, I've been to California, I've been to Nevada. Since COVID hit, I've been to probably 10 other states. Nobody likes these things. Whether it's Alabama or California, whether it's Atlanta or Las Vegas. Nobody likes being as isolated as we are right now. Whether it's because you want to go out to the club and party, or whether it's because you want to go to church and pray. Nobody likes not being able to go sit at a restaurant and have dinner. Nobody likes having to limit how many people they can see for Thanksgiving or Christmas. But there's a lot of things we do that we don't like. Because it's better for us, it's better for our children, it's better for our grandparents in the long run of things. You may not like getting up and going to work every day, but your kids like to eat. You may not like wearing your seatbelt. You may not like having to put your child in a child seat. But these things are there for their safety and for yours. Look, if somebody, an individual or a government, actually wants to come threaten your religious freedom and you're not impacting anybody else, I'll be right there with you, fighting against it. And if you want to take your congregation of people that are old enough to consent, old enough to understand what they're signing up for, and go create your own community like the Amish and some of the Mennonites, and y'all want to ignore all the COVID restrictions because you don't give a damn about a pandemic, you want to get together every Sunday and every Wednesday and every whatever other day and worship together, I'm not going to stop you. But if you want to live in this society and not quarantine yourselves, and put everybody else at risk that doesn't believe the way that you do, I'm not going to be with you on that. I can't understand it from a religious or a theological perspective. And I can't understand it from a human perspective, much less an American perspective. This being Thanksgiving week, it's going to be a relatively short show. That's honestly going to wrap it up for me. I appreciate y'all tuning in. We'll be back with a full show next week. I hope you had a happy holidays, a happy Thanksgiving. I hope everybody was safe. I hope your family's safe right now. And start making plans for Christmas about how you can do it as safely as you can do it. Do not let Christmas turn into the year or the time of year every year where you remember that in 2020 you gave grandma COVID and she passed away. It's better to have one Christmas that's not as comfortable than it is to have a lifetime of Christmases where you're regretting your own immaturity and selfishness. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend.